Now, I don't see any arms up, but that's because I can't really see anything from the seat at all. But
I have actually one question that was brought to me,
Right,
that someone raised to me during the course that I thought was kind of an interesting one. And it goes in large part to what I do. A lot of what I do and a lot of what John does as well is planning and setting up structures both for the operation of a business, of a family's wealth over the course of time, and for passing that wealth on to future generations, or subsequent generations. The freezes, the trusts, the will planning, the foundations, all those sorts of things. And one fellow asked me, he said, what if you get to that point and the people who set it all up have put all these structures in place, and then the funeral's done for the last parent, and the kids troop down to your office and say, we don't want this, we just want to kill it, we just want to check. What do you say to them then? I mean, I say, you're the boss, you can do whatever you want. But I wonder, and I'd be interested to hear your others' thoughts about the role that the kids or the next generation play in the planning for the current generation. Because I know that I'm continually meeting with advisors and the senior generation. And sometimes the next generation is there, but quite often they're not. And one of the advice points that I can continually giving to parents, particularly parents who are worried that there's going to be problems with the next generation, is sit down and talk about it now. Because you have a lot of influence while you're alive. You have no influence once you're dead. And as soon as both of you are gone, somebody's going to remember an incident when they were 16 years old and they felt slighted, and they're going to bring it up against their sibling. Then they'll start fighting, and then, well, the happy ending to all this is the lawyers win. But, it's only a happy ending if you're one of the lawyers. It just goes to the overall...
We have a lawyer here,
Yeah, I know.
But Dave's a lawyer, too.
I'm a lawyer, too.
Yeah, I mean, you guys
that's why Bleak House had such a happy ending. The estate was used up in cost.
You guys are an endangered species, no doubt, right?
Yes.
No doubt. Well, you've seen the old picture of the cow, and people are fighting over the cow, pulling on either end of the cow, and the lawyer's milking the cow.
But it's an interesting part for business continuity, and we spend a disproportionate amount of our time setting things up in order to be continuous into the subsequent generation. What happens if the subsequent generation just doesn't care?
I just came from a program John was mentioning, the Director's Education Program, and one of the participants in the Director's Education Program was a young woman who was a musician. I thought, what's she doing here? And she was Generation 6 of the Richardson family, and they have a process by which children and the following generation are actually educated in the family business and in how to govern that family business. Now that's, I remember being at a conference where Carlton Fisk, who was Generation 4 or 5 of S.C. Johnson, those are the people who make Glad Wrap and stuff like that. And they also had a very similar system. So I think if you want to be looking to have your children in your business and set up all that planning, is preparing them for what does it mean to own a business. Not to work in the business, but to actually own it and govern it well. Using an outside board of advisors or directors is also super helpful for doing that kind of generational transition.
Yeah, and I think there are connected questions, like, for example, if 3 kids were to inherit shares of an operating business, but one of them was the president and the other 2 basically were on the sidelines, maybe they were on the board, maybe they weren't on the board, how would they agree to a share of the profits? In other words, does the president, who's working there full-time, feel that they're only getting 1/3 of the profits and their siblings are getting 2/3 of the profits and not having to show up for work? Well, that's an interesting philosophical question, because let's say that you are choosing to invest in the Royal Bank of Canada and you want to buy shares in that company. Do you have to punch a clock to get the dividend? If you buy a building, do you actually have to sweep and do the toilets to collect the rents? So we don't have a problem with other assets. We certainly seem to have a problem with family assets or family businesses in answering this question. So there's two organizations I'll suggest that you might want to check out, especially if your questions are related to family. The first in Canada is called FEX, the Family Enterprise Exchange, which has sort of reinvented itself with a really strong curriculum and really good events. And they have one major local chapter here in Vancouver. So you might want to check that out and find out if there's some content there. And then there's the North American Family Business Network, which is a big, broad North American-based model, again, with lots of great content. So these are places maybe to see what best practices look like. I'm of the mind, coming back, Dave, to what you said, we've made the decision, my wife Claire and I have made the decision to have shared all the financial information and our plans and intent with all of our kids. And we did that a few years ago and made a commitment to meet on a regular basis to say, okay, this is how things are going. It's a decision we think would facilitate any outcomes that would occur as a result of us not being around. So that's the approach we've chosen to take, and one I would have no trouble endorsing for anybody else.